Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I am your host, Tiffany Daniels. Now, if you see that box behind me, announcement. Everything is good with Wayfair. I just got all my equipment today, and thankfully, I live in an apartment full of tech heads who can assist me later putting it all together. So, just randomly throwing that out there. All right, folks, we are going to get started. We went over extinction-based treatments yesterday, went through that. I'd rather not go back over it again. We're going to go to other treatments here in just a moment. But before we do, folks, just a few things. First of all, as always, we are going to include the link to this summary in the description box, as well as the link to the petition to shut down the Judge Rotenberg Center. Also, folks, if you have young children, some of the topics we discuss when we are talking about the Judge Rotenberg Center do involve torture, and some of the things we discuss can be rather graphic. So it is recommended to please, if you have small children, to use your headphones when watching these videos. So, without further ado, we are moving on today to 4.43 other treatments. So let's get started. Oh, also disclaimer real quick. I may rant because some of the research they are quoting is outdated and very, very ableist. So if I go off on a tangent, please excuse me. Also, I might butcher some of these scientific terms and might stumble over some of my words, so apologizing in advance. 4.43 Other treatments. In addition to the more common behavioral and pharmacologic treatments for SIB and aggressive behavior, there have been numerous other treatments reported in the scientific literature for SIB, self-injurious behavior, and aggressive behavior. Most of these studies are single-case reports or included a relatively small sample size. Nonetheless, the findings from these studies consistently report that the majority of these treatments have been demonstrated some degree of effect in reducing SIB and aggressive behavior. Additional treatments for SIB and aggressive behavior are described below. 4.4.31 Surgical. Surgical treatment of aggressive behavior is not a recent concept. The earliest report dates back to the early 1960s. Initial studies focused on surgical ablation of the amygdala, which has long been described as the putative anatomical structure involved in aggression. This is the frontal lobotomy, folks. The majority of these early reports relied primarily on parent, physician, nursing, or ward staff observations of behavior to document improvement. There's a reason why frontal lobotomies are not highly recommended, folks. It may stop self-injurious and aggressive behaviors, but it also takes away autonomy, which we've gone over autonomy before. The ability to make decisions for oneself. So, moving on. 4.4.3.1.1 Ablative interventions. The earliest report of use of amygdalotomy was reported by Nurabayashi et al. 1963-1966. In these studies, amygdalotomy was conducted on 60 patients, 14 of whom were under 14 years of age. These patients were described as irritable, excitable, distractible, and assaultive, and reported an initial response rate of 85% that was reduced to 68% at 3 to 6 years of follow-up. Oh my God. This is barbaric as hell. So instead of shocking them, let's just do a frontal lobotomy. That makes sense, right? God. Verna and Madsen, 1970, reported 12 female patients ages 23 through 69 years, 6 of whom were diagnosed with schizophrenia, that demonstrated violently aggressive behavior with assaults on fellow patients and ward personnel, and/or marked tendency towards self-mutilation. After bilateral amygdala bleh, amygdalotomy, there was a marked improvement in or disappearance of aggressive behavior in all but one patient. This is where I start butchering stuff. Balasubramaniam and Ramamurthy reported the results of amygdalotomy in 100 aggressive children and adults. Unfortunately, few details of the psychiatric state pre- and postoperatively are given. The authors reported that 75 patients demonstrated either complete or almost excuse me, cessation of aggressive behavior. Kilo and colleagues, 1974, reported the effectiveness of amygdalotomy that was performed bilaterally on 15 and unilaterally on 3 patients exhibiting severe aggressive or self-mutilating behavior. 9 subjects, 50%, were improved a year after operation. Improvement was maintained in 7, 39%, for periods ranging from 27 months to 6 years. 4 non-epileptic cases had convulsions during the period of review. 1 patient had a persistent mild hemiparesis dating from the post-operative period. There was a tendency for epileptics to respond better than non-epileptics, and for the intellectually disabled, God, 2014, patients to respond poorly. However, none of the differences were statistically significant. Psychosurgery for patients with self-mutilating behavior has focused on the use of limbic lumpectomy. Price et al. 2001. These authors describe 5 patients with primary psychiatric diagnosis, which include obsessive compulsive disorder or schizoaffective disorder with comorbid severe treatment refractory SIB. The primary outcome measure was the Clinical Global Impression Scale, which indicated that sustained improvement was noted in 4 of 5 patients with a substantial decrease in SIB. Psychosurgery for SIB and Tourette syndrome has also been investigated, as SIB is a common comorbid behavioral disorder in TS and is present anywhere from 25 to 50% of patients. Robertson et al. 1989. Anadon and colleagues, 2004, described a case report the use of cingulotomy and subsequent limbic lumpectomy in an adolescent boy with Tourette's disorder for SIB. The patient's repetitive and medically serious SIB and failure of all other treatments prompted this intervention after careful comprehensive review and discussion. Following the second surgery, the severity and frequency of his SIB were reduced. More recently, Jamez Ponce and colleagues, 2011, conducted a prospective analysis of the efficacy and safety of bilateral cingulotomy and anterior capsulotomy for aggressive behavior. This article is in Spanish. The English language abstract indicates that these authors studied 25 patients with a primary diagnosis of aggressiveness refractory to convented treatment. Subjects were clinically evaluated with the Mayo Portland Adaptability Inventory and the Global Assessment Functioning Score. Based on inclusion and exclusion criteria, 12 patients were finally included and surgical treated. The surgical intervention significantly decreased aggressive behavior, as assessed by the Mayo Portland Adaptability Inventory and the Global Assessment of Functioning Score at 3 and 6 months follow-up. Only 5 patients showed either mild or transitory post-surgical complications. These authors concluded that combined bilateral anterior capsulotomy and cingulotomy successfully reduced aggressiveness behavior and improved clinical evaluations. These effects were obtained with fewer complications than previously described surgical targets. So these are folks that used surgery to mess with a particular type of the brain in order to reduce self-injurious and aggressive behavior. Notice that they did not list in any time and anywhere in that was ever tested or done on an autistic. Thank God for small favors, those poor people. But anyways, I'm not very trusting of a surgical solution. That's because of the horror stories I have heard for so long about frontal lobotomies and the fact that it does take away aggressive behavior, takes away self-injurious behavior, but it also takes away your sense of self, your ability to think for yourself. So, I imagine in the years since that it is a completely different science, and I should probably read up on it more, but I just wanted to say. Okay, moving forward, 4.4.3.1.2 brain stimulation. There are no FDA approved DBS devices for treatment of SIB and aggressive behavior. The idea that deep brain stimulation DBS of certain neuroanatomical areas to ameliorate aggressive or SIB is largely based on putative functional neuroanatomical targets that purport to medicate these behaviors. The earliest description of stimulation dates back to 1970, when Sano et al. 1970 used a combination of stimulation and ablation procedures of the posterior hypothalamus excuse me, to treat disruptive aggressive behavior. The author reports a marked calming effect in 95% of the cases during the follow-up period, which ranged from 2 to 7 years. The results of the operation were classified as excellent if the patient showed no violent, aggressive, or restless behavior, was calm and placid, and required no care or supervision, and good if the patient showed occasional irritability, but was usually calm and tractable and required no constant watching care. Among 42 cases, excellent results were obtained in 12 and good results in 28 cases. No significant adverse events were noted in this report. Frazzini et al. 2005 described the therapeutic effect of chronic, continuous high frequency DBS of the posterior hypothalamus on 2 patients with aggressive and disruptive behaviors who were resistant to drug or behavioral interventions. Both patients were intellectually disabled, but also had medical complications: myoclonic epilepsy, congenital toxoplasmosis. In both cases, DBS and consistent improvement of disruptive behavior, which remained present at 1-year follow-up. The methods by which disruptive and/or aggressive behavior were assessed is not directly described in this study. More recently, Frazzini et al. 2013 summarized their experience with DBS for the treatment of aggressive and disruptive behaviors refractory to conventional pharmacological or behavioral treatment. This included a summary of 7 patients who underwent bilateral DBS of the posterior hypothalamus. The lack of cooperation from all patients was attributable to the severity of both the disruptive behavior and the most prominent comorbid condition, intellectual disability. 6 of the 7 patients obtained a marked reduction in their aggression and disruptive episodes as assessed by overt aggression scale. The authors did not report any serious adverse effects in their case series. Kuhn and colleagues, 2008, described a case report of a 22-year-old female with repetitive oral self-mutilating behavior after a severe traumatic brain injury treated with a bilateral DBS of posterior hypothalamus. The procedure resulted in the complete elimination of self-mutilation during a 4-month observation period. So what they're talking about, see, they're talking about self-mutilation, which is, yes, a self-injurious behavior, but not one, in my experience, that is that common with us autistics. Autistics, we tend to be more of the bang our heads type as opposed to the self-mutilation type. Although it leaves bruises, and if you do the scratches on your arms, might be considered self-mutilation. It's not exactly to degree to what they are talking about here. Now, the two things that they have been talking about is first, surgical means by which to curb the self-injurious and the aggressive behaviors. We've gone to the ancient one, which is the frontal lobotomy, but they're talking about a couple of new ones that I haven't really studied yet. So I'll have to be doing a little bit of research on that. They're also talking about brain stimulation. They are stimulating a particular point of the brain that is associated with those who have those self-injurious and aggressive behaviors, especially those with intellectual disabilities, and what the success rate has been from what they've seen going back from 1970. So we've gone through quite a few of alternative treatments as opposed to what the Judge Rotenberg is toting. Some of them are freaking barbaric and archaic. We're going to be actually getting into one of those tomorrow as of right now, due to some of the things going on in the autistic hashtag and some of the idiocy that's been going on there today. I just don't really have the capacity to go into this without going on a 3-hour rant. Just saying, we've lost a lot of our autistic brothers and sisters to restraint. It's been a horror story, so I won't really be going into that right now. I'm having a really good day, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it here for now. Now, before we leave out, I was going to include a video in this today, but I can hear the dog in the back room there, and I probably need to take him out before he has a hissy fit. So that's going to be all for right now. Now, before we close out of here, folks, we don't get that many views on this channel. The few that we do tend to get removed from time to time. So if you could, please don't forget to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time, and as always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.